Watch this vidcast, or I'll gouge your eyes out.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I am James Rivera. We have some news today before we get to discussing our movies. I guess I'll get started first.
Horror show news.
Nobuhiko Obayashi, the influential Japanese director of Hausu, which we reviewed on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, has died. And actor Dieter Lasser of The Human Centipede has also passed away. So on my end, pretty depressing news.
Horror icons are dropping like flies during this corona, and none of them has actually been caused by corona yet, right?
It just happens to be at the same time, yeah.
Yeah, they're just getting older.
And you have some more positive news, I believe.
Yeah, I have two news stories. The first one is wrestler Chris Jericho from the WWE to co-host the season premiere of The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs. And the other one is Full Moon Features releases the first coronavirus horror film, Corona Zombies.
Fucking schlockmeisters. Nobuhiko Obayashi, the influential Japanese director, passed away at age 82 from cancer that was revealed as terminal in 2016. He died on April 10th is what it looks like, or at least that's when it was reported that he passed away. It was April 10th. He had one more film coming out called The Labyrinth of Cinema. It was originally set for release in Japan on the day of his death, but was pushed back because of coronavirus. So, admittedly, I've only seen one film from Nobuhiko Obayashi, and it is House, or better known in Japanese as Hausu. Like we said, we reviewed it on the podcast. I thought it was a fantastic film. I thought it was inventive. I thought it was creative. I thought it was funny, original, surreal. One of the most unique horror films I've ever seen in my life, and it definitely had a very unique directorial stamp on it. I'd never seen a movie quite like House, and I definitely would love to delve further into this filmmaker's career. And from what I understand, he made films all throughout his life, and as you can see, all the way up until the day he died. And he started out actually making commercials. He directed, I believe, over 2,000 commercials in Japan before he finally made it to cinema. And he liked movies that were expressive, that were unique, and that were very quirky. And he was been a noted influential director in Tokyo, Japan for quite a while now. Had a very long career. And of course, the movie House. If you haven't seen it, anybody check it out. It's available on the Criterion Collection. If you have Amazon Prime, you might have to rent it for a few bucks. But it is totally worth your money. It is completely surreal. It's unlike any other horror movie I've ever seen in my life.
Any director who creates a character like Blanche the Cat, that's a legend right there.
Rest in peace to Nobuhiko Obayashi. The other unfortunate passing is Dieter Lasser. We know him as the German doctor in The Human Centipede, the one who said, "Feed her! Feed her!" He passed away at age 78. It looks like, though, this was reported late. His family didn't report it for a while. He passed away on February 29th, so they actually waited a couple of months to break the news to the world. And of course, he was born in Germany in 1942. He had a prolific career in film and television, but he'll probably always best be known to horror fans as the doctor from The Human Centipede. And he was pretty effective and fucking creepy in that role.
Yeah, a lot of people either love or hate the Centipede, Human Centipede, because of the nastiness of it. But I loved it mostly because of Dieter, the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Instant icon, I thought. When I first saw it, it's instantly creepy. He's memorable. He feels original. He feels like a fully realized horror character in the middle of this nasty exploitation film, which was, by the way, filmed very well too.
Those are the two news stories I got. Now to you, Michael. Give the audience something more positive now.
Yeah, a little more positive. With first of all, with wrestler Chris Jericho, he's going to co-host the season premiere of The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs. It seems strange to me at first, but I do like Chris Jericho. He's a cool personality, and he is a good wrestler.
I was not aware that Chris Jericho was a horror film fan or was knowledgeable of the horror genre, but that's always interesting.
Yeah, he's been dipping his big toe in it for a while, and he's got like a metal band and everything, so metal always goes hand in hand with horror. But the movie they will be hosting is unknown as of now, but Chris Jericho says, when Joe Bob Briggs asked me to come watch a movie featuring butt darts, brain sucking, backgammon for digits, a maniacal mini oats, and a dick dog, I said, what time and what trailer park? I have no idea what movie he's talking about.
But I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I want to see it. So in the same statement, Joe Bob says, Chris Jericho is the most exciting wrestling personality to befriend horror since Rowdy Roddy Piper co-hosted They Live with me on TNT years ago. In fact, Jericho may be the most famous wrestler in the world right now, not to mention lead singer for a metal band that charted on the Billboard charts with an anthem that thousands of arena fans know by heart. I'm going to share the hosting chair with Chris so that he can go wild in a 70s horror classic he's been crazy about since high school. He's a world-class athlete, podcaster, actor, musician, and he's really a one-man bundle of pop culture fun. And on April 24th, he's going to prove that he's also a drive-in kind of guy. The season premiere of this, The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs, airs on Shudder on April 24th.
Well, I'm pretty excited for that. I'm pretty sure whatever it is going to be really fascinating or interesting.
Yeah, and I did like him on wrestling, but what I've seen of Chris Jericho's real personality, he's much cooler than a personality than he is a wrestler. So I'm looking forward to him mixing it up with Joe Bob. And I'm really curious about that movie, dude. The other one, we'll go right from this into discussing it because James and I both saw it this week. Full Moon Features releases the first coronavirus horror film, Corona Zombies. It's actually Hell of the Living Dead from 1980 and Zombies vs. Strippers from 2012 edited together, and it's produced by produced and directed by Charles Band, who did Evil Bong 1 through 7, and it has new footage with actress Cody Renee Cameron. And here's a synopsis. Ditzy damsels in distress, toilet paper famine, inept world leaders, mass media gone wild, a virus from hell, and hordes of ghouls hungry for human flesh combine in Full Moon's maniacal horror comedy hybrid Corona Zombies. Part irreverent satire, part gonzo Italian zombie movie remix. All Full Moon mania. Corona Zombies takes aim at the madness surrounding the crazy times we're all living in and delivers the funniest and most controversial exploitation movie of the year. Now you can watch it exclusively on the Full Moon Features app, which is $6.99 a month, and I believe you missed the they were given a discount where it was like $2 and something for the first month. I took advantage of that to watch it, but I don't think it's available on the free trial. Is it? There's also a free trial when you go through Amazon, but it's not available there. But on this Full Moon Features app, you can see films like KILLJOY, the KILLJOY films, the Gingerbread Man films, the Evil Bong films, Puppet Master, Demonic Toys, and classics like Dead and Buried and Castle Freak. So it is a pretty cool app.
So this coronavirus movie belongs to two very proud traditions of exploitation. The first thing is like classic exploitation horror movies of the 1970s and the 60s, 70s, and 80s always try to capitalize on whatever was going on in the moment, whatever the current fear in the public was. That's what they tried to capitalize. But they never had the ability to do it this fast in the age of digital editing. And you rarely ever got to see this type of turnaround go really quick. It also belongs to another proud tradition of exploitation, the most cheap, stitched together thing that you can imagine. And back in the days, a lot of exploitation film editors or companies would rebrand names, would take one film and rebrand it under something else and slightly splice the footage a little bit differently to try to market it again, sell the same movie with different titles again and again. So the fact that this is stitched together from an Italian exploitation zombie movie that looks like something Fulci might have directed, which came out in 1984 and it was filmed in 1980, combined with footage from Zombies vs. Strippers, correct?
Yeah.
That was like about 10 years ago, 10 years or so, around like a decade ago. And then footage from right now. This movie looks like a completely stitched together Frankenstein hybrid. It's very obvious that you're watching through 2 or 3 movies stitched together. But that goes, like I said, that's a very proud tradition in the exploitation genre. So it's only really living up to its roots. And man, is this movie a hunk of shit.
I mean, it's part funny and clever, but it's mostly just mind-numbingly dumb, but in a funny way.
There are a couple of amusing moments in it. Like, all right, first off, the dubbing in this movie is fucking awful. And I've seen some awful dubbing in my life. But what I found really interesting in this, they went so far as to have the dubbing going on when the characters are clearly not speaking, when there's no one's mouth moving, and the voices are still going on. So obviously mismatched. But it did produce this one gem that I couldn't let slip by. Oh my gosh, lady, you look like Barbara Bush on meth. Sorry, I'm only into Puerto Ricans. This moment instead, when a fat older white zombie lady is crawling towards the Corona Task Force, or whatever you call them. Really hilarious shit. So there's a lot of nuggets of dialogue, of really badly dubbed dialogue that is absolutely laugh out loud hilarious. A lot of it references now, but at the same time, a lot of it is just stupid.
My favorite line was one of the Corona Squad guys was watching, they were watching the zombies like eat somebody, and he said, that one's laughing. They're so spiteful.
There's such an obvious spirit to the movie, and it's very self-aware. There's a lot of some of the more comical elements involve footage used. They use footage of Donald Trump talking about the coronavirus situation. And in this footage, he's saying, it's fine, we're going to open up America in about 3 weeks, and then it'll flash to hordes of zombies feasting on people's flesh. So it's the juxtaposition of the ridiculous footage and with Donald Trump saying that we're going to reopen America really lightens the satire. It does really manage to tap into this era, but God, so much of this is so cheap, and so much of it is eye-rollingly bad. It exists in this sphere where between so bad it's good and just plain awful. It exists somewhere in the middle of that spectrum.
You know what you're getting into right when the movie opens, because it opens up with an animated sequence of the corona virus floating around, and it says music by 2Ply. I know what I'm in for with this one. The cutting to the news is clever at first. Like it cuts to the Scramble Soup Company, and they're making bat soup when the zombies attack. And then that's when they throw Trump in, saying you'll go through a process and you'll be fine, you know. And then they show the Corona Squad. The Corona Squad is out to stop the hoarders, and they investigate a hijacked barge full of toilet paper.
This is really cheap, even by exploitation standards. It's so obvious. It's so blatantly obvious that when it switches to the footage from the 80s to the footage from now, you look like you're looking at old, washed-up film stock and editing it back and forth with a very pristine, clean digital look that's not even cinematic, in my opinion, anyway. Yeah. And then you go to another form of digital sheen with the zombie strippers. It's so obvious what you're watching is cheap as fuck and was not even originally meant to be seen together. It's so jarring and so strange. I mean, I think it's kind of bad, but I guess some of the humor comes from the fact that it's obviously 3 different movies stitched together with news footage to try to make something out of it.
There's a ton of jokes about social distancing and the Impossible Burger, Trump, even Tiger King jokes are thrown in there, jokes about dating sites.
I don't know if I could fully recommend this movie. My opinion is this. You know what it is, and you know what you're getting into. But I do have to give them credit. They did create something of a time capsule. If once this whole situation is over and we look back years from now, we can go back and watch Corona Zombies, and it'll be reminded of everything. We'll be reminded of everything that was going on at the time. The new lingo that we're using, terms like social distancing, what's popular during the time, the news stations. It's going to be a time capsule film for better or worse.
I think when it goes off the rails, it it relies on the news coverage too much.
Wait, you're implying it was ever on the rails from the first place, though, Mike.
But I was into it, you know. I was into all the jokes and everything, but then it became just too stupid because it's a news flash that says zombies converge on a strip club, and then they show the pieces of zombies versus strippers for no other reason besides just filling time. And then when it goes off the rails is when they start cutting from the strippers to the Corona squad in the jungles of the jungles of Baltimore.
Yeah, the jungles of Baltimore.
So you're supposed to believe that the news organization has remote cameras in the jungles of Baltimore that are following these guys.
It's an interesting movie, that's for sure. It's a movie. And I even find it mildly amusing in a certain way, and it's kind of funny, but I don't think this even qualifies as so bad it's good, despite its moments.
Well, I found it entertaining and laugh out loud funny for about a good 3/4 of the movie, and about 3/4 of the way in, it just got old. I just wanted it to end already. But then it ended strong with a lot of, funny jokes in a row, so I ended up laughing out loud at the end. So it redeemed itself by the end for me.
And I think what's going to make this as an easier sell for people as a way to spend time is that it's exactly 1 hour long. So it's a pretty brief experience.
It's exactly as stupid as it sounds, so it just depends on whether you're into that type of humor or not.
I don't think you have to even worry about recommending this movie, because based on what we described, I'm sure the audience can tell if this movie is going to be for them or if it's not going to be for them.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be for a lot of people.
It's just as stupid as it sounds, but it's also not as lazy as it sounds. Mm-hmm. They did put some work into this thing, and pretty fast.
Yeah, kind of What's Up Tiger Lily vibes, Woody Allen.
Before we get to the next movie, I was going to mention, by the time you hear this podcast, we're going to be a couple days away from 420. And it came out all of a sudden. We didn't expect it this year, so we didn't get to put together a 420 podcast like we did last year. So I'm just going to smoke for the rest of this podcast as a tribute to 420.
And I smoked right before the podcast. And actually, if you're looking at something to laugh at on 420, you can't go wrong with Corona Zombies.
You smoke a nice, fat, strong bowl, and you're going to really enjoy Corona Zombies.
My only question is do you think this is going to be a new subgenre, maybe a brief subgenre in exploitation, Corona-sploitation horror, COVID-sploitation?
I think so, because look how everybody flocked to all the virus movies once it happened.
There's another film that was put into production. I think it's another cheap B movie called Corona, and it was actually the real first movie to start capitalizing it. But Full Moon Features, being the cheap bastards that they are, got their project started after and finished it before. So they basically got to make it to the finish line as the first to capitalize on it. So we have Corona, which should be upcoming, and Corona Zombies. We have the birth of COVID-sploitation or Corona-sploitation. That's Corona Zombies. Mike and I also watched another film from last year that we try to get in before the podcast, before the end of the year, but we're catching up on it now. It's The Prodigy, 2019.
Yeah, I'm curious what you think of this one. I have mixed feelings about it.
Okay, so it's kind of a typical bad seed horror movie, kind of what you might expect. But for what it's worth, I thought there was a lot of really good atmosphere and a couple of genuinely creepy scenes. And I thought the child actors that they chose to be the troubled child in this one was a really good choice. He kind of got under my skin.
Yes, he was really good and really creepy.
And what was the hole in the ground from last year?
Yeah.
Okay. I actually think that that's a better film than the Prodigy is, but I actually think that the kid in the Prodigy is a little bit creepier than the one in the hole in the ground, and I think that both child actors do give really good performances, but I have to say that this kid tops it a little bit because he seems genuinely psychotic.
Yeah, but as a film overall, I think Hole in the Ground blows this one away because they both followed a lot of the similar tropes. of a Killer Kid movie, but this one kind of got clunky, and mostly in the third act. I think Hole in the Ground stayed solid throughout.
I found the final act to be a little bit far-fetched, but it didn't totally destroy the movie. I was into it when I was watching it, and because like I quarantined or whatever, I watched it really late at night by myself. So there are a couple of scenes that if I watched this in the daytime, it wouldn't have had any effect on me. That probably creeped me out a little bit at 2 a.m. It had some effective moments in it, but the final act is a little bit far-fetched. Even within a story that's already far-fetched to begin with, the last act is really strains credibility.
Well, my main problem with the final act is I love a good female character, a good, strong female character, a smart one. And that's what she was through the whole movie until that third act. And she became stupid all of a sudden.
And we're talking about the mother of the bad kid in the movie, the prodigy.
Yeah, Taylor Schilling.
Oh, and before we go forward, just so the audience understands, this is the synopsis. A mother concerned about her young son's disturbing behavior thinks something supernatural may be affecting him. And it turns out...
We've all heard that before.
Yeah. So there's not really much to say about the plot. This is pretty much standard fare. I think it's an enjoyable horror movie. I like it. I think it flies a little bit off the rails, but I think the kid does a really good job.
If you want to know what to expect out of this movie, just look at the first 2 minutes. If you notice in the first 2 minutes, there's 2 jump scares in a row that set up the story, which are done well, but it's also the type of movie that's going to give you 2 jump scares in the first 2 minutes, so don't expect a whole lot. But the whole part with them showing Taylor Schilling is pregnant, and then the cross cuts between the pregnancy and a killer being chased by the cops, it starts jumping in time, like 20 weeks in, shots don't hurt the kid. 26 months in, the kid is developing fast, and they're thinking of preschool already. 5 years in, he's underdeveloped in some ways. 8 years old, he's loving, but he's weird. So it was effective, but I thought it was kind of...
rushed.
Yeah. I was going to say lazy, but that's harsh, but rushed, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the first part of the movie, I wouldn't even call it a first act because it's so unusual. It's like a first act that pushes together 4 or 5 acts and puts it before the actual first act of the movie. So it's kind of an extended prologue where time elapses really quick just so you could get to the main part of the story, just so you could get to the meat. And it does feel a little bit rushed, and it feels like they're just trying to make time really quick while flying through it. But for what it's worth, within that rushed amount of time, there is some interesting scenes interspersed as you see him growing up, such as the moment in the class with the wrench and some of his behavior with the mom. I think that despite the fact that kind of an odd, unwieldy structure, it sort of works for what they're going for.
Yeah, so basically when he's 8 years old, that's when the movie starts being a traditional narrative. Yeah. And then as soon as the traditional narrative starts, you get the obligatory babysitter scene. Mm-hmm. Like I think every Killer Kid movie has to have something where he fucks with the babysitter, you know. But I thought it was actually done well, and it's pretty creepy. But the one where I started suspecting that this film was going to go off the rails was when you see the boy carving a pumpkin, and he's got the skull costume on. It's really creepy and really effective, and the camera kind of pulls in on him, and then it shows them, you know, other than that, it doesn't show that it's Halloween. It doesn't show why they're showing this scene. They just show the boy walk to the bathroom, and he washes half of his face off. So then that's the cover of the film. That was the poster. So it seems like that scene just exists for him to sit there and stare in the mirror and tell you, oh, there's 2 different people inside this kid. I thought that was a little cheap, and I'm like, oh, what am I in for the rest of this? That's why I got a little suspect throughout the rest of it after that.
You know, what movie I think is a heavy influence on it in a certain way, especially, this is going to sound strange, especially the way that it was marketed. The original Child's Play. Because the original Child's Play, when it came out, it wasn't marketed as a film about a killer doll. It was kind of suggested that in the original marketing that the little kid, Andy, was actually going to be the killer. Man, different times, people wouldn't even know who Chucky was. But the poster of the original Child's Play movie just shows the babysitter falling out the window, and it says Child's Play, and it looks sinister, and it sets you up to think that it's the child who is actually the killer in it. And it starts in a similar, in a somewhat similar fashion, where Charles Lee Ray is being chased down and gunned down by a police officer, and he puts himself into the doll. Originally, they were teasing the audience, is it in the kid's head or is it the doll? Is it in the kid's head or is it the doll? And it turns out that it's the doll, but the first half of Child's Play is actually directed in such a way as to suggest the possibility that it's really all in Andy's head and that he's the actual killer. This seems like a movie where Child's Play, where they decided to go with the original trick marketing to make the child the killer, by having the killer die at the beginning in some sort of like chase down or like a kind of shootout or whatever. So it's like a reverse Child's Play. I wonder if that was the inspiration, but I could be reaching, but that's kind of what I got out of it.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that until you said something, but a good point as far as painting the kid as the killer, except he was really the killer here.
It's the soul of the killer inside a kid instead of the other one.
When they go to that I think of the hypnotherapist, the fact that he goes straight from being clinical to being completely supernatural and really heavy-handed in his description of what was wrong with her son, I thought that was a really unrealistic, where they were trying to be a little more quality, a little more slow burn, a little more character driven up until then, and then it kind of got, heavy-handed and hokey.
You don't think that the bridge between the psychological and the supernatural is organic enough?
Yeah, like why would those doctors approach her with that,
right away?
They tell her what it is right away, instead of kind of easing her into it and saying, this is possible, but either way it's a problem. I think they would have been a little more careful to explain it to her.
I feel this is also similar to The Hole in the Ground in the way that both of these movies are pretty boilerplate. They have cookie-cutter plots that are utterly predictable. What redeems both of them is that they both are relatively well-directed, but The Hole in the Ground never flies off the rails at any moments, and its script is a lot more focused. It goes off, it comes off a little more organic and a little bit more natural, and it all feels very smoothly operated from beginning to the end. This one is well directed in a lot of ways and is atmospheric, has a couple of unique jump scares, but the script is slightly unwieldy. It rushes past things too fast to get to a certain point, and it makes jumps in logic and larger character shifts just to get its script where the writers want it to be. You could see the writers' tricks more quickly than in The Hole in the Ground.
Rushes through a big chunk of the narrative, and that's one thing, and then it slows down in a good way where it's a nice slow burn, and then the narrative itself kind of rushes, and it kind of just goes from story beat to story beat to story beat, and then it slows down again to almost a crawl, and I was bored to tears. It starts leading up to the climax, and then the mom makes bad decision after bad decision, and it just completely loses me, and then she's like helpless and inept all of a sudden. But for me, the pros were that it had pretty brutal kills. The kid is genuinely creepy and a really good actor. Of course, the Taylor Schilling that plays the mom, she's a good actress, but she can't help what they asked her to do at the end, just become completely inept and dumb. And it also looks good. The cons are the script is all over the place for me. It doesn't know if it wants to be a serious horror drama or a silly killer kid film. Mm-hmm. So it was just too disjointed for me by the time it ended.
You watch any other films this week, Michael?
Yes, since I got the Full Moon Features app, I wanted to see their film Killjoy about the killer clown from back in 2000. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize, I believe this movie is mentioned on the Horror Noir documentary, isn't it? Directed by a black man with almost all black cast. But it's directed by Craig Ross Jr., who went on to direct Prison Break, Bones, and NCIS, and you can see that in the direction of this film. And the executive producer was Charles Band, the one that put Corona Zombies together. And it stars Kareem J. Grimes. For those of you who've seen the show All American on Netflix, it was a CW show. I love it. I'm obsessed with it. And this really good gang member character on there, his name is Preach. and that is Kareem J. Grimes, and he actually stars in Killjoy. I kind of freaked out. I didn't know about this, and I just finished watching All American, and then I put on Killjoy, and all of a sudden Preach is standing there, so I nerded out on that. Angel Vargas is very good as Killjoy.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the middle of an obviously cheap, very low budget film, I think this villain was excellent in his portrayal, and it looked excellent. The makeup on him was excellent. So the synopsis is: a young man in the hood is killed by local gangsters, but not until he summons a demon clown named Killjoy, who then picks off the gang members one by one. It shows Killjoy go around the hood in his ice cream truck, and he tells the gang members that he's actually a drug dealer, and he lures them into the truck. And when they get into the truck, they're transported to his fun house, and that's where he kills them. The kills are inventive in their concept, but poor in their execution. Like, there was no good kills in this. Killjoy burns a guy like a joint. I think that's where they got that from Scary Movie.
But do you think, you say that the kills are good and the conception of the kills are good, the execution is not. Do you think that's more because budgetary constraints, or?
I think budgetary, because if you watch it, one thing I didn't expect is for this to be story driven.
Mm-hmm.
Like they concentrate a lot more on the story and the acting and the drama than they actually do the killing and the silly stuff. So the story is dramatic to the point of being a bit melodramatic, but the acting is surprisingly good. There's lots of nudity, lots of sex. The women of the film really carry it for me. And the man that comes in, he just tries to act like a hero, but he's a dumbass.
It doesn't feel as cheap as Corona Zombies then?
No.
Okay, just had to make sure.
And the ending is a bit of a bite off of Nightmare on Elm Street, where the whole thing was a nightmare. No, it wasn't. It was Killjoy all along. But and it ends with a really bad R&B song. So it has its low point.
That is the R&B songs in The Room.
Not quite that bad, but pretty close.
Okay.
I'm definitely interested in why. I think there's 4 more Killjoys. So I plan on watching those before the first month is up on the Full Moon Features app. But I really enjoyed it. A few bad things, but mostly good. So I really enjoyed Killjoy from 2000.
Another movie that I watched, I actually watched a lot of movies from this director. Lucio Fulci is somebody who's a filmmaker who's always been a bit of a blind spot for me, Italian filmmaker, and we've discussed him before on the podcast. I'd barely seen like a couple of his films, but since this lockdown, I've actually binged a lot of Fulci movies. So I'll be discussing them very slowly. I haven't had a chance to talk about any of them. The first one that I want to discuss is probably the best one that I saw out of the group. It's The Beyond from 1981. In this movie, this is the synopsis. The 7 dreaded gateways to hell are concealed in 7 cursed places, and from the day the gates of hell are opened, the dead will walk the earth. All the movie really needs is that vague synopsis, because none of this operates. I loved this movie, by the way, but it operates very similarly to the way that Dario Argento Suspiria operates. There's a very thin sliver of a story there that's more of an excuse for a kind of excessive style that the Italian horror filmmakers specialize in. The best way for me to describe this movie is like a cruder, more vicious Suspiria. Wildly creative, it's extremely inventive. The gore is extremely fetishized, more so than the way that Dario Argento fetishizes the gore. There's so much detail in the blood and the close-ups and everything that it kind of bypasses being disgusting, and it almost becomes beautiful and fascinating to watch. The movie consists of a series of bizarre scenes, nightmare scenarios. Like, one of them is a man's face being torn apart by tarantulas in very slow and graphic detail. And the tarantulas, when they crawl, they make these very metallic screeching sounds when they're crawling across the floor. Very unrealistic, it's very exaggerated. But I don't think that Fulci was going for realism at all. The sound mix that he's using right there really heightens the sense of dream logic. That's the way that dreams work, the way that spiders might seem exaggerated, or their footsteps and their movements would seem more horror. It's getting less at the reality of what tarantulas are like and more what the fear of tarantulas are in the psyche. And this film is just loaded with so much eye-poppingly bizarre imagery that the fact that the script is very loose kind of hardly matters, because Fulci is so committed to this surrealistic horror style, this really crude, harsh surrealistic horror style, that it works in a way that kind of bypasses narrative, in my view. Another one of the most effective gore scenes I've ever seen involves a melting face, a melting skull, and a daughter walking on her mother's face being completely melted across the floor. Fulci does some very harsh shit with all of his characters. He loves to revel in the gore and the extreme depravity. I thought it was, in many ways, a kind of brilliant movie just for the way that just for the effect it had while you're watching it. It's kind of the movie you might be like, what the hell am I watching? But you cannot take your eyes off of it the entire runtime.
Well, I actually love the script, just the writing itself, just the dialogue, and I love the characters. In a lot of Fulci movies, I end up being attached to his characters, but this one in particular, you just love the characters and you feel so much when things happen to them. For such a movie that relies on the exploitation elements and the kills and the really impressive visuals, it also has some good writing and good acting and some likable characters.
Well, I guess it worked for us a little bit differently. So much imagery in this movie that it's a lot to process. It kind of feels like it gives your brain visual overload because you're so mesmerized by everything that you're seeing that when it's all over, it's almost like a jumble of images that you're trying to remember and clear out in your head. But it's really creative stuff. It's very original. I finally see why Lucio Fulci is so revered within the horror genre. And I'm glad to be catching up on a lot of his films. Like I said, I've seen a bunch of them now, and this is the first one I wanted to talk about. The Beyond, fantastic movie.
Yeah, I love the visuals and everything. And Zombie used to be my favorite Fulci movie. When I rewatched this one recently, that one went up to the top. It's so good.
The guy's done a lot of excellent movies. Like Don't Torture a Duckling is another one that I also love. City of the Living Dead. Zombie, as you mentioned, The New York Ripper. Having seen a bunch of his movies, the style is consistent. It's kind of what you'd expect out of Fulci, but the variety of stories that he has quite a variety of stories. Like something like Don't Torture a Duckling or The New York Ripper is vastly different than something like The City of the Living Dead or The Beyond, and Zombie is something completely different for that. So the subject matter for all of its the fetishization of violence and all the strange elements, he has such a wide variety of storytelling in his filmography. And that's one thing that's really impressed me about my Fulci binge.
Well, for all the great kills and visuals, it's great for exploitation fans. Almost all of his movies are great for exploitation fans because they're titillating enough to be enjoyed by every horror fan. And then cinephiles can look at them as well and see the stylistic flourishes and the quality of the filmmaking itself and get a lot out of them too.
I feel that everything that he does is both an exploitation film and an art film at the same time. I don't know if he manages to do it, but everything is, like you said, perfect for exploitation fans, but they're extremely artistic. And even when they're very cheap or crude, there's such a high amount of energy and enthusiasm put into it, like the degree of creativity, the inventiveness of the gore, the kind of ingenuity. Like he was kind of a magician, using these really low budgets and using the budgetary constraints of his movies to enhance the aesthetic of the movie. Where it kind of felt like if he wasn't on such a low budget, it wouldn't be as vividly imaginative. The films wouldn't be nearly as vividly imaginative as they are. It's just the fact that he was forced by all of his limitations to get supremely creative is a big part of what makes him such a unique filmmaker and a filmography. And then over the coming weeks, not next week because next week we have a special podcast, but over the coming weeks I'll be talking about different Fulci films.
Well, what other filmmaker could do a movie like Zombie that has a zombie underwater fighting a shark, but it still comes off as artistic?
I think a lot of what Argento did was kind of grand and operatic and over the top and kind of hallucinatory. I feel like Lucci pushes it a step further. Argento was a more, I would say, refined filmmaker where his visuals were a lot cleaner and he looked like he was operating with bigger budgets than Fulci was operating with. So there's more of an artistic sheen to what Argento was doing. There's something a little bit more crude and a little bit more raw about Fulci's work. It seems a little...
I also think Fulci's a little more consistent than Argento was.
I could definitely see that. I think he was probably more consistent than Argento, but Argento probably had higher highs, if that makes sense. In my opinion, anyway, where certain films like Deep Red or Suspiria really peaked his artistic foundation, whereas Fulci's movies are approaching that. I still prefer Suspiria and Deep Red to a lot of the best of Fulci, but his filmmaking is a lot more consistent. You feel like from movie to movie, for the most part, you know you're going to be getting something good, or you know what you're going to get out of it.
That's all the movies we watched this week. We watched Phantasm, like we said before, but we're going to talk about that next week along with all the other Phantasms, and we're also going to have an interview.
So next week's podcast is all going to be about the cult favorite franchise Phantasm. Really big cult horror movies. Mike will be discussing the Phantasm series, and we're going to have an interview with somebody who is currently working on a documentary about the Phantasm films called Women of Phantasm, the documentary with balls. So this will be our first podcast about a film franchise, tackling an entire film franchise.
Yeah, and the guest name is Deborah Huerta.
Yes.
So we'll be talking to her all about Phantasm, and then we'll be talking about all about the movies. I'm really excited about that one. And we've talked about it for a while that we wanted to do a full podcast dedicated to a franchise. And I think it's really cool that we're going to do the first one with Phantasm. Because I'm a huge Phantasm fan, but I have not seen 4 and 5 yet.
Okay.
So I'm going to be watching those for the first time. But the first 3 I've always loved. One of the first movies I watched in the drive-in when I was a little kid, I think I was 7, 8 years old when I first watched Phantasm. And I'll discuss my favorite scene next week. And I still remember sitting in my parents' station wagon. And I can remember that scene just like it happened yesterday.
Movies are like magic. They're time capsules that take us back to different eras, different times in life. All right, folks, just keep up with us. Keep following us on our Instagram page at Pickles Horror Show. And on Facebook, what's our page on Facebook?
Facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show.
Yeah, we'll give you all the updates on the podcast, our television series Horror Show, and Mike's upcoming feature film Pay Up. We'll keep you updated with everything. Till next week.
Have a good 420, and everybody stay safe out there. We'll get through this together.
Blaze up and watch Corona Zombies. Until next week, happy horror.
Happy horror.